Okay, grade 10, this is your your last lesson of the week and the second last lesson before your quiz. So we're going to be doing the respiratory system today and how that works, focusing on humans to start and then looking at some other examples as well on its physiology. So a reminder, your second big idea you're collecting data on from this is how do body systems differ between species. You should already have your first big idea done, and this is building into this second big idea right here. Okay, here's the template for today. So you're going to draw a respiratory system here. It's going to be an annoying one to draw, but take your time and do it. A simpler diagram here showing pressure changes here, and here's in the diagram we'll be drawing about different organisms. You can choose which one to draw. So this is the most complicated drawing. Give yourself some space for that one. Okay, so take a second, draw your template, pause the video, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the structures. If this is the first drawing I want you to draw, you don't have to label every single thing in here. I'm going to give you a list of the structures you need to know for this course. If you're taking biology next year, you'll learn more about this in more detail later on, and you'll learn more structures, but for now, this is sufficient. Okay, so the respiratory system, the best way to kind of think of it is it's a passageway for gases. Okay, for oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to exit the human body. I noticed in your homeostasis lab, a lot of students were focusing completely on oxygen and forgetting carbon dioxide. Both are really important. You have to remove CO2 just like you have to get oxygen, so don't forget the carbon dioxide. So these are the key organs you need to know for this course. You have the nasal cavity. Most of the time the air comes in the nasal cavity instead of the mouth because it's designed to filter the air. You have nose hairs to help trap any pathogens or dust or anything. It also has more spacious up here in the nasal cavity to warm the air before it actually enters your lungs, spending all this energy in homeostasis to maintain internal body temperature. And then you don't want to mess that up by then taking in really cold air. If you've ever been in a really cold place, breathing outside in wintertime, when it's very cold, you can feel it almost feels like sharp in your body. And if you didn't have the nasal cavity to kind of warm it up first, it'd be much worse. The nasal cavity also has mucus to help trap any sort of pathogens and stuff inside it as well. Then we have a larynx. The larynx is right here, and that is the opening to the trachea at the base of the kind of where the mouth and the nasal cavity combine. After that, you have the trachea, which is this tube here, which you should feel in your throat. So you ever heard the expression, it's gone down the wrong tube? You don't want to take food into your trachea. That goes into your lungs. Food should go in your esophagus. So you have two main tubes in your throat, one for food, one for air. We don't want to mix those up. That leads then to the lungs. The lungs is this entire structure here, which are made of different parts, subparts. So the trachea leads to two bronchi, left and a right bronchi, as the big main branches, and then branching off that little tiny branch are called bronchioles, little kind of almost root-looking bits. And then on the bronchioles are these little sacs we already talked about a little bit last class that are called alveoli. We'll look at them more on the next slide. And that's when gas exchange actually happens. Then we have muscles that are important here for actually allowing the system to work. So the important one is the diaphragm right here below the lungs, and it will descend and ascend to help change the size of the thoracic cavity and cause gases to move in and out. And you also have intercostal muscles. Now in this diagram, they took the ribs out so you can see the lungs more clearly, but I'll show you the one later that shows the intercostal muscles, and intercostal means between the ribs. So muscles between the ribs are also important for respiration. Okay, so I'll just take a minute, look at this diagram, and try and trace the path that the air follows as it enters and exits the lungs. So pause the video, trace the path, and name those structures. Okay, so what you should have said is something like where it enters the nasal cavity, moves past the larynx into the esophagus, into the trachea, and then splits into either one bronchi or the other bronchi. So it goes into the right bronchi, so the left bronchi, and then it goes to a bronchiole. It enters an alveoli where it's going to exchange gases, and then that air will then move back out the bronchiole, out the alveoli, up the bronchiole, through the bronchi, back up the trachea, back past the larynx, and either out to the nasal cavity or can also go out the mouth. That's the path of the air, and you should be able to name that. So these are the different organs you need to make sure you know and can label on a diagram. Okay, you need to memorize where they are, what they're called, and how to spell them. Okay, so every structure in this system is designed to support its particular function. A really good example of this is the trachea. So if you kind of reach your neck back and rub against your throat, you can feel the rings. And their trachea has rings of cartilage in it that help keep it open. We want to have the trachea very big and open so that way air can move in and out. If you have asthma or you have a big cold, you can kind of get swollen in your trachea and it makes it really hard to breathe. So normally trachea tries to stay open as possible to allow air to come in and out very easily. Okay, another part of the structure of the respiratory system would be the alveoli, because the function of this, remember, is to get oxygen to your body through the bloodstream and carbon dioxide out of your body. So it has to do this with capillaries. So capillaries are these very small, thin blood vessels here. It's called capillary beds, a whole bunch of these really tiny blood vessels. We'll talk more about that system later on in this unit. And the gases can easily enter and exit. And those capillaries, these little blood vessels, are on top of what are called alveoli. So these alveoli are kind of sac-like, which is little, almost like hollow bags, and they're covered capillaries. And this is where gas exchange happens. They're very open. The inside is where gas is going to be moving around. The outside is covered by capillaries. So it can take in carbon dioxide from the blood into the alveoli and out towards the lungs and out towards the mouth and all the way out. Or it can take oxygen from the alveoli into the bloodstream, and that can go wherever it needs in the body. The structure of the alveoli. They have a very large surface area. Why do we think that's a good thing? Why is it necessary for alveoli to have a big surface area? Think about this for a second. Well, the surface is where they interact with the capillaries and where gas exchange happens, where carbon dioxide moves into the alveoli from the bloodstream and where oxygen moves from the alveoli into the bloodstream. And for that to happen, you need to have a big surface area. The more efficient it's going to be is by having a larger surface area. Okay, so that's the first part of the lesson. Now, inspiration and expiration are the two processes of we actually are breathing, right? And that's not good. Just gonna edit this while we're doing it, guys. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and close your eyes and really take some deep, deep breaths and try to feel your rib muscles, your intercostal muscles, feel your diaphragm, feel the air movement, feel what's happening in your body. One of the best things about this topic is during a test or quiz, you can just sit there and breathe and feel it and know the answers to questions, which is wonderful. It's something you have to remember. A lot of people who don't know a lot about physiology, they think that the lungs are these muscles that pull air in and push air out. The lungs are basically empty kind of sacs. They're air sacs. They cannot move on their own. They are compressed or they are given space to expand based on muscles moving around them. We already told those muscles already. Those muscles are the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. So the diaphragm and the intercostal or rib muscles, those are the ones that can increase and decrease the size of the thoracic cavity. So the thoracic cavity is this space here. Notice how here in inspiration it's quite big and here in expiration it's gotten quite small because the diaphragm is going to contract, it's going to go down, which you can probably feel if you're a musician. You definitely should be used to playing like from the diaphragm, breathing from the diaphragm. You can get much more control that way. So you probably feel quite clearly your diaphragm being pulled down. That's contracting, that's active. And the diaphragm relaxes and moves back up. So that's one part that's going to help change the size of the thoracic cavity. The other thing is the intercostal muscles. So we have external and internal intercostal muscles. Just externals are fine for this course. So when the externals contract, it makes more space in your chest. You can feel that happen when you're breathing, and that makes it a bigger space. You're gonna take air in. That's inhalation or inspiration. And when they relax, it gets smaller, and that's expiration. The air moves back out. So again, breathe for a second and see if this makes sense to you. Okay, so it's the size of your lungs that is changing. And so the thoracic cavity space changes the volume of the lungs, and that changes the air pressure. So when you have air that's compressed in a smaller space is going to have higher pressure than the same amount of air in a bigger space. So this change in volume of the thoracic cavity changes the air pressure, and that's going to cause air to move in and out. So look at this in a little more detail here. So in inspiration, I want to make this as big a space as possible. If I make it really big, there's going to be more space. And if there's more space or a larger volume, there's more space for the air particles in there to move around. There's less pressure. And if there's less pressure in your lungs than there is in the environment outside, air is natural to want to come in. Just like with concentration gradients or any gradients, pressure gradients work the same way. Everything wants to be equal. So if this is too low and this is higher, things will just naturally move in. So you're not sucking air in. What you're doing is creating a big enough space that the air will want to move in by itself because it's lower pressure inside your body. So to do that, the external intercostals are going to contract, making the ribs bigger, the thoracic cavity bigger, and the diaphragm will contract and move down, giving even more space for your lungs. That's inspiration. In expiration, everything's going to relax. Your diaphragm relaxes, your external intercostals relax, and that makes the thoracic cavity much smaller. If I have a smaller volume, I'm going to have higher pressure, and that means it's lower pressure out here and higher pressure in here. So then the air is going to naturally want to move out towards the low pressure area. So the little dotted line shows you the shape of the thoracic cavity before. Your chest actually is noticeably smaller when you're breathing out than you're breathing in. I'm sure you've noticed before. If you haven't, try it right now. Breathe in, breathe out. See how your chest expands. Okay, so what I want you to do now is you need to write out the steps of breathing. So you're going to talk about the pressure. This is the diagram I want you to draw for this. If you want to draw this one, go for it, but it's a lot more complicated. This one here shows the same kind of idea, a little bit simpler. So we have an increase in volume, means that lower pressure, so the air is going to move into the lungs. Here's the diaphragm, there's the ribs. And if we decrease the pressure, we're going to have higher, decreased volume means higher pressure. Diaphragm relaxes, intercostal relax, smaller space, air will move out. So you can draw that. This one is just to show you that when we say intercostal muscles, what that means is the muscles between the ribs. So in your rib cage, you have all these muscles between the ribs, and the external ones, those we're talking about in this course, those are the ones that contract with the diaphragm and relax the diaphragm to make your rib cage bigger and smaller. So what you're going to do now is I recommend work with a partner for this, is you're going to write out the steps of breathing. So you're going to talk about the different structures, you're going to talk about the pressure changes, the movement of the diaphragm, the intercostal muscle movement, you're going to talk about the volume changes, connect the first part of the lesson, the structure, with this part of inspiration and expiration. Okay, so don't forget the anatomical names of the structures. What you should be aiming for is about 16 steps total, 8 steps for inspiration and 8 steps for expiration. So really work with somebody else on this, use your notes, talk it through, write down step by step what's happening, like a procedure for a lab report. I'm going to check this in your homework and give you feedback on it. Okay, so use that opportunity to practice what we've been learning in class. Okay, the next thing we're going to be talking about is what happens when things go wrong with the system. So a really common way for scientists and doctors to understand how systems work is if something goes wrong. If something is not working properly, we begin then understand why it's so important. So emphysema is one type of lung disease, and it's a chronic, very slow pregnancy. So chronic means long-term, it persists for a long time, and you're slowly turning your alveoli from these nice, healthy pink sac bubbles that are there to have a lot of surface area for gas exchange into these big ones with holes in them. So this would happen with emphysema. This is healthy lung, and this is emphysema up here. They have all these big holes. Whereas lung cancer, the other one I want to talk about, is where we have cancer cells growing inside the lung. So here's lung cancer on an x-ray. Cancer is always just cells that will not stop dividing, going through mitosis again and again and again, getting more and more and more of them. And lung cancer is that's happening in lung cells. But lung cancer is very prone to metastasizing, which means it moves from one tissue to another, one place to another. And lung cancer often moves to the brain, the bones, the liver, and the adrenal glands, all very important organ systems. Lung tissue that is consumed by cancerous growth is no longer functional. So in this individual, this part of their lung tissue can no longer do gas exchange. The rest of it still can, but that part is no longer useful. Just like in this person, this part is no longer really useful, very effective, but this part is still okay. The major number one cause of both of these diseases is tobacco smoke. But there are other factors that can cause it as well. Pollution, environmental factors, genetics can also contribute to likelihood of getting emphysema and lung cancer. So both of these cause shortness of breath. So you're not going to be able to breathe very well if you have emphysema or you have lung cancer. A lot of people who have these different diseases are on oxygen tanks to help them get more oxygen for every breath they take. So pause the video and think about, why is that the case? Why are these causing shortness of breath? Well, in emphysema, if you don't have a functioning alveoli, you have these kind of big holes instead of healthy small sacs, there's a lot of surface area for gas exchange is lost. So then when you're bringing in the air in to reach the alveoli and exchange gas with the blood vessel capillaries, it can no longer do that effectively because there's all these big gaps, a lot less surface area there. And in lung cancer, the tissue here can no longer do gas exchange, which means you're going to have less. The bigger the cancer is, the more tumors you have, the larger they are, the worse it's going to be. Now, unfortunately, there is no cure for emphysema, and while we can kill the cancer cells, we can't bring back that lung tissue. Why is that? Does anybody know? Think about it for a second. Well, one of the unfortunate things about alveoli is they can't undergo mitosis. They can't make new alveoli. So if you lose alveoli, maybe you have smoked some tobacco and you end up getting emphysema, you cannot replace them. It's not like a blood cell or a skin cell where it can be replaced. You've got what you've got when you're an adult, and that's all you're going to get. So the only way to treat these, with cancer, we can stop the cancer's growth with chemotherapy, with radiation, and hopefully then preserve the rest of the lung tissue. With emphysema, the only way to treat them is to have a lung transplant. Just replace the lungs altogether, because you can't fix that lung once it's gotten too bad. Okay, let's talk about some other organisms besides humans. So, it's all about physiology, not students. We're going to focus on humans. It's more helpful for students taking DP Bio, and I think it's good for everyone in the world to know a bit about how their own body works. So if they go have something the matter with in the future, or you have kids someday and they get sick, you have a basic understanding of how that works, and you can make logical decisions for your own health. But we want to also connect this to other organisms as well and have a broad knowledge of how that humans aren't the only organisms, and there are other ways of doing things. So we already learned about plants, that they exchange gases through the stomata of their leaves. We talked about that already, with homeostasis for plants. Insects have different options for this too. Some of them have what are called spiracles, these little dots in a caterpillar that allow gases to come in and out. Spiders have what are called book lungs, which are really cool lung structures back here that allow it to get gases in and out. Sponges, these are in the ocean. They will pull water in and water will go out, and dissolved oxygen, dissolved carbon dioxide will come through, and it'll be exchanging gases that way. Lots of different terrestrial animals have lungs, like chickens, cows, dogs, cats. All of them have lungs that are similar to our own lungs, but can have slight differences. And a really interesting one are fish. Fish have gills, which are very different from ours, and I want to just look at that one more closely. So you only need to draw one of these five. You can pick which one you want to draw. If you want to draw more than one, that's great, but remember your big idea is how the systems of different organisms differ. So it's good to know a few examples. You could also choose to draw this diagram if you're feeling particularly ambitious, but this is how gills work. And I want you to compare and contrast the human system, the respiratory system, with that of fish. So I'm going to talk through how this works for you, and the second kind of little assignment from today's lesson, the first one was writing the steps of respiration, the second one was be compare and contrast. Remember, compare and contrast means things are the same and things are different. You have to have some of both. Okay, so in this case, what fish are getting the oxygen from is from the oxygen that is present in the water. Okay, and the CO2 their bodies can put back into the water. So it's dissolved oxygen. So they're going to take water in through their mouth and then force it through their gill slits. That's where it gets out. So this is kind of taking it in, pushing it through here. When the water moves through the gills, what's called the gill arches, there's blood vessels here on the side to get the gases into the blood vessels, and the water flows over all these little fibers. And those fibers are the gill filaments, and that's where the gas is going to happen. It's kind of like their version of alveoli. So here is a kind of zoomed in on this part. It's happening here. We have blood vessels with the oxygen poor blood and the oxygen rich blood. The water is going to flow over these blood vessels, look like capillaries. But they have the capillaries as well for gas exchange. And the water, as it flows over them, the oxygen is being taken away. So the 100% oxygen goes down to 70%, 40%, 50%. It's pretty efficient at taking out oxygen. And then here is the blood. In the blood, it starts with only 5% oxygen, then it gets 30%, 60%, 90%. It's taking in the oxygen. So the oxygen goes from the water to the blood as it's moving over the gills, as it's passing through the gills of the fish. Okay, so one direction is where the water's flowing over, the other direction is the blood flow. And that's called counter-current exchange in opposite directions. Okay, so you need to now is pause this and compare and contrast this explanation of how fish breathe with their gills and compare that with the entire human system. What is the same and what is different? Work with a partner, that's totally fine. Okay, that was today's lesson. So you need to, of course, upload your notes from today, and that should be including your inspiration, expiration steps, as well as your compare and contrast between fish and human respiration. If you find this unit interesting, look up book lungs. Book lungs and spiders are really cool too. Don't forget, we have a quiz scheduled for next week for Wednesday, and this lesson will be one more lesson next week will be on that quiz. All right, guys, hope you're having a good day and everything's good for you guys at home. You're not getting too bored. I notice we're getting a little better at handing things in during the daylight hours, some of you better than others. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.